Firstly, let me introduce David. David Zardel is a good friend of mine. He's a professional interviewer. He's a business school lecturer. He's written his own books. And in fact, one of his books is still in print. I don't know how many years later, and it sold 10,000 copies, which in South Africa is big.
25,000.
25,000. Okay. I haven't sold 25,000 of mine. But, right, and he does interviews for the Auto Organization, he does interviews for Radio High, and does many other things as well, lecturing for business schools, I know in the Free State, all over, even in, where was in Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, yeah.
All right. So let me kick off. I want to kick off with one thing. Everything in there is a man called Montefiore, I can't remember his actual name, a young man. He lectured over here with his book on letters, but he takes his letters out of the museums, very interesting letters, and then he gives a talk on them. He's a very good talker and he sells his books and he's great. But the unique part of my book is that everything, 99% of the book is all my own possessions. Those are all my letters, my documents. Here and there I've used a Time magazine picture just to illustrate so you can make it more interesting for you. And the odd photograph which I've taken off the web. But otherwise it's all mine. I regard them as my own characters of my own book. Like if I was in a novel, they'd be the characters of my book. You might not recognize anybody up top there. Right in the top left is or Wellington, down here is or Nelson, and so and Edison you might notice, and Barry O'Brien for the shot photo of what it was. Anyway, that's words on paper, and just to kick off.
So, Jeff, if I can ask you a question before we get going. So first of all, Jeff introduced me as if I'm giving the talk.
Okay, no.
But Jeff's really giving the talk. And the way where we met is we lived in the same complex together. And I came round with my kids to wish him good Shabbos. And I used to take the kids around. And Jeff invited us in. And do you want a drink? We had a drink. And over the years, became friendly. And then you know how you see somebody, but you don't know the depth and the history that lies behind somebody. And it was unbelievable to connect with Jeff. And I saw that he'd written one of these books. And I looked through it and it gave a history of all sorts of things. Him attending the Olympic Games and all sorts of different things. And the first question I had for him was the question really around the book. And I'll ask the question now is, how long did it take you to put the book together, first of all? And it's quite an eclectic and serendipitous collection. So how long did it take you to put it together, and how did you even start thinking of it?
Okay, let me tell you how I came to start it. First of all, I had this cousin in London. His name was Harold Fisher, and he wrote a book called Fisher's Follies, Adventures of Innocent Stamp Collector. He was a real serious stamp collector, the 12th biggest collection of British stamps in the world. And he wrote books on the penny black, and I used to see him in London, and he was a big help. When he gave me his little book, he sent it to me. I thought, I wonder I'd like to write a book. But as I got older, I thought, it's about time I now catalogue my stuff, because one day when I die, the kids are going to not know what's valuable and what's not valuable. And some dealer's going to come in, and what normally happens at the books, they look at it, they say, yeah, look, I'll tell you what, we'll give you 4,000 for the lot. But they've already seen there's 3 books there that are going to collect more than 4,000 anyway, and all the rest they've just keep in their shop. But with letters, it's a little bit different. I'm not a serious book collector. I've collected good books to give me the information that I need for my documents. But how I started writing. The book took me 5 years to write. I got up every morning at about 4:30 in the morning. I was told that if you're writing, it's a good time to write in the morning. You've got no inhibitions, and it's a good time to write. I didn't know how to set about taking all these stories and making it into a book. At one stage, I decided I was going to do it as interconnectedness of people, but I'll go into that later, right at the end of the talk. I'll show you what I mean, is how would you connect various people of all my people in the book, connect those characters together as if it was like a novel, but not, just the interconnectedness. And eventually I started writing, and I had it edited by Alison Lowry. She was the former CEO of Penguin Books. In fact, that's where David's first book was done by her. And also Gordon Forbes. We all lived in the same complex. We all had, by sheer chance, the same editor. But it's a book about letters that tell stories and stories about letters. It's not a history book, it's not a biography book. I'm not an historian, I'm not a biography writer, but there's some fascinating stories and how I got it. Serendipity is a very important part of my whole collection. I've just been very, very lucky with things. I once spoke to Professor Tobias and asked him, what does he think about serendipity? And he said he agrees 100%. He was doing some research work down below the grade of civilization underground, and they sat down for lunch. He said, if I had put my lunch on that rock instead of this rock, I'd never have discovered this important skull that he found. Serendipity is very, very important. I can tell you a few stories about that if we get time, but there's a lot to go through. So let me just get started. What makes a trivial? First of all, let me just tell you about letters. Letters, they call them, you buy them or you get them on auctions or collectors or dealers. An autograph letter signed is when it's off. That's an autograph letter signed. If it was just a letter signed, then it'd be called an LS, which is just a letter, might be typed or somebody else wrote it, and it would be signed.
So how do you know when it's collectible or if it's fake?
Okay, so let me give you this example. You can't read the writing, so there's the transcript. This is just a letter from Lord Rosebery, as it happens. He wrote to Gladstone's wife. We'll go into that afterwards. The letter is trivial, but the very last line, goodbye, I'm just off to the races, which I picked up, and I'd had the letter a long time, and then realized that it's got value. I'll tell you why. Because Lord Rosebery, when he was at university at Oxford, he went to Harrow and then he went to Oxford. Very brilliant guy, but he was already Earl of Rosebery when he was at Oxford. And he was a big gambler, and then he bought a horse. And they told him, we can't have you owning a horse here and gambling. You either got to leave or you've got to get rid of the horse. And he decided to leave. The legend has it that he told his friends that one day he will marry an heiress, one day he'll win the British Derby, and one day he'll become the Prime Minister of England. And he achieved all three. He married a Rothschild. He married a Rothschild. His horse won the Derby 3 times, and he did become the Prime Minister. And just that little thing there, just off to the races, because he was always at the races. So that makes that letter collectible, and it's not a serious letter. But now I'll show you a more serious letter, which is a letter signed by Michael Faraday. Michael Faraday is the guy that really got us electricity and everything about it. This letter is about his own subject, You can pick in reply to your first question, I conclude there can be no doubt iron disc would become magnetized by the force of the battery current in the coil to a far greater degree than would require from the inductive action of the earth on as iron. I won't go into the rest. The guide asked him about comets. He said, as to comets, they're wonderful things. I confess myself utterly unable to form any notion of them, which is acceptable to my mind. That was in 1858. And Einstein had two pictures in his study. One was of Michael Faraday and one was of Maxwell. Those are the scientists. He's really one of the most highly regarded scientists of all time. It's an interesting story. Here's a connection between him and Napoleon, is that he was visiting France during the war between England and France. They still allowed the scientists to come through unhindered, and he spotted Napoleon in one of his parades in Paris. That was just so there is always a connection. All right, so that's that one. Right, where it all started. Okay. I was living in London, just been there a while. I walked into a flea market, and the guy showed me a visitor's book to show you what the book looked like. It had signatures in it, and he started telling me with his Cockney accent about all the serious signatures that are in this book. That there was Lizzie when she was 10, and her granny, and other kings and queens signed it, and Ike signed it, and all kinds of things. I looked at it and I was still very, very naive, and I thought, well, it's too good to be true. Well, this has got to be a fake. I was worried about it. It cost all of £12. That's what he wanted for it. And I looked at it, and it was getting late, and he said, look, you've got to make up your mind. I said, look, I'll tell you, all I've got on me at the moment is £7. I gave him the £7. I've got to think about it over the weekend. I'll come in on Monday, or whenever. That was a Wednesday on that day. And the next, I came in and I paid him, which was on the 16th of November, 1966. I paid Old Smith for the book. And it's just it's an actual piece of history, this book. There's the first signature that was in the book. It started on the 6th of July 1933. That was Juliana, Princess of the Netherlands. I just put in that picture so you could see what she looked like. She used to come to England fairly regularly. The Dutch were looking for a Protestant husband for her, and there were a few arranged meetings. She had a very successful meeting with somebody that she really liked, but he was hemophiliac. What do you call it? Hemophiliac. And he had an accident and bled to death.
Jeff, can I just take you back a second?
Sure.
When you saw the book, then in between, that night in between,
Okay.
you weren't sure.
All right, now I wasn't sure. That's an important point. That was why I brought up my what dead on. Even though I'm talking, Jules.
Not a good
I'll
thing.
carry on in the
It's a
meantime.
toy.
And
it's working fine.
No, it's not.
no, that's all. Okay, thank you. And I went that night to Harold Fisher for dinner, and I said, Harold, I've got this. I saw this fantastic book there, but I don't know if it's a fake or it's genuine. And I described it to him with the different color inks and how it looked, and different signatures and handwritings. And he said, well, how much do they want for it? So I told him it was £12. He said, well, go in on Monday, the next day, and grab it, because that's the genuine thing. I said, how do you know? He says, who's going to make a book like that, all those different colors, different handwritings, and sell it for 12 quid? Said it was £100 or £1,000, whatever, in those days. Then you could be a bit worried. And that's what I did. And I never forgot that, because it helped me with everything. So that is how I was lucky enough to get it. So this book was in the Tower of London, and it was signed, used as a visitor's book to be signed by dignitaries visiting the Tower, prominent people. So Juliana was the first to get there, and the next ones, which I'll show you, even if that's the price of the whole thing. There's Mary R, the royal family, the kings and queens only sign at the top of the page. They don't sign below somebody else. That was Mary, the Queen Mother, the old girl. That was George VI mother. Okay, Mary R. And that was Elizabeth when she was 10 years old. That was the Queen Elizabeth who reigned all those years. And that picture I took of the web was very, very close to that date, 26th of October, 1937. And that was Margaret Rose. She signed it as Margaret Rose. George underneath was not King George. It was, in fact, George, the Duke of Kent, who was, and he got killed in the war. And that Elizabeth Countess of Turing, I got mixed up the other day. I even thought that that was the Queen, that it was George VI's wife, but it's not. Just the Countess Turing. So that's really was a fantastic find. Very, very big It's a very big collecting item overseas, is the royals. In 1937, the King of Denmark came and visited London, and he signed the book. That was apparently a joke at the time, I was told. People just wrote Adolf Hitler. Same as I often used to check in the early days, if I came, we had to sign. I used to say Mickey Mouse visiting Donald Duck or something stupid. So that Hitler had a signature, completely unlike that. You can't even read his name. I have an idea it might have been his wife who did that as a joke, because I see there the name underneath it, Charlotte something, was a lady in waiting, and he wouldn't have come with a lady in waiting. So I just got a suspicion that it might have been her. So that was in 1937. This is an interesting one because this is now July 1940. That's King Haakon, who was King Christiansen's brother, but he was the king of Norway, Haakon. And that was him. His wife had died, Clara, but this was Olaf, his son. And between the two of them, they were very popular kings. When Haakon died, Olaf became king. During the war, when the Germans invaded, they put up quite a good fight, and they had to, they were defeated, and Hitler insisted that he step aside, and they would appoint a puppet, so it would become a puppet government, and it would be headed by a guy called Deacon Quisling, and that's where the name Quisling comes from. He was going to replace him. He refused to accept that, and the Germans continued, and he had to escape. The British helped him to get onto a ship and get him out, where he stayed in London for the rest of the war, and then they took him back in June 1940, in July 45. So that was and now we get to Elliot Roosevelt. That happens to have been the Roosevelt son, but that's not the important one. You get to the bottom one, you can see it's blue. It actually was done in ballpoint. It's the only one in the whole book that's in ballpoint. That was the 26th of June. That was 20 days after D-Day. That's 1944. Dwight Eisenhower. He signed it as general. Well, let me give you a blown-up picture of it. The 26th of June. I think that was a Freudian slip, that 27. It was actually the 27th of June. He must have had in his head the 6th. 6th of June was D-Day. Must have been in his head all the time, because nobody else made a mistake anywhere in the book. And he brought his son. I checked it out on the web. John Eisenhower got special leave to join his dad in London. And he signed it as General USA Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Forces. And then his son was the second lieutenant. And yeah, so that's an important signature. Normally, collectors don't collect signatures, you know, just get a signature. It's not of much value, but this all in one book, it makes it fantastic. This is quite interesting. You see there in the middle there, Alice Mary, there she was. If you were a royal, she was the last granddaughter of Queen Victoria. And if you're a royal, you don't put your surname, you just put Alice Mary. Okay. Interesting one above it, the Germans started to come into England, and that guy at the top there was a Gruppenführer. Can you read the top there? Gruppenführer from Frankfurt. There was another Gruppenführer and a third Gruppenführer. And they came there, they all tried to spread the Hitlerism, the fascist things in England, and they got a following of sorts. Underneath Alice Mary was her brother, the Prince von Sachsen-Coburg-Gotha, which was really the name of George V, and he changed his name. Sorry, has it gone off again?
Yeah.
I don't know why. Yeah, can you hear me still? He changed his name. He's the one that changed the name from the German name, which is getting very unpopular, to the House of Windsor. Frederick Cambridge was also Alice Mary's brother, and he was, Prince von Sachsen-Coburg, after the war, he went to jail, and the Americans arrested him because he was a Nazi sympathizer. Frederick Cambridge actually was served in the army on the British side, the two brothers. That was them. There you've got an interesting guy. The middle there, his name's Hugo. Yeah, 2 minutes. I've got so many names on my head. Can you read him there? Heckner. He was the president of the Zeppelin Works. Zeppelin Works are the ones, when those big hydrogen balloons that went over, and the Hindenburg that crashed in 1936, and a lot of people got badly burnt. It was a terrible thing. It was all filmed as it came down to earth. Hugo was the president of it, the Time magazine there, but he was also a pilot, and he actually could fly it. He was an engineer and he flew it. It was very, very popular in Germany. So popular that they got him to stand to become whatever Hitler became. Not the Führer, the Chancellor. And he was going to stand, and he would probably have defeated Hitler. Hitler was a nobody still at that stage, or he wasn't quite the somebody he became. But then the old Chancellor, whatever his name was, the old man decided he was going to stand. So Heckner stood down, and we don't know what might have happened in the world had Heckner become the Chancellor instead of Hitler. So I think, okay, now, right, this is the book to the Tower of London. Now, David, you were going to ask me a question.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, what is the most important letter that you have?
The most important letter that I have. Okay. I just want to catch up to that. So when I wrote the book, my editor said, now you've got to put these chapters in some sort of sequence and put a slither of biography of yourself in it, just to make it better. It's really a slither, it's about 1%. But I left London in 1967, came back to South Africa, and now started serious collecting. At 1969, at Sotheby's, I bought a job lot, which was hundreds. Then I bought a second job lot and a third job lot, and suddenly I had a collection of thousands. And it was like a most incredible thing. You open this. It took me years sometimes to open and see all the documents that were in there, and with some very surprising finds. But the years went on, and I had got already into being involved in I was helping somebody to collected things to do with diamonds. Eventually I became a diamond dealer myself, but actually got this letter before that. I heard about a letter of Rhodes that was coming on at Sotheby's, and it was for auction, and I was very excited about it. And then this thing appeared in the Sunday Times, and I was very upset because I thought it was going to draw a lot of people's attention to it, and they're going to want to buy the letter and have a lot of competition. Anyhow, on the day of the auction at Sotheby's, I walked into the rooms. As I got there, I had planned that I would take a second bond on my house, but I was going to own that letter because the letter said, it was a fantastic letter. The last page says, you will have read my speech on De Beers, and then they cogitated on the day of monopoly is not far distant, and who knows amongst whom will wrest control of diamonds for the world, your C.J. Rhodes. It was written on Kimberley Club letterhead. It was an early letter. It's a fantastic letter. It's got an amazing letter. Anyhow, I went to the auction and I heard that, got there a bit early, and I saw that De Beers were buying other things. And I went out and spoke to the auctioneer who I knew well, that big tall guy, I can't think of his name right now. And he said, look, you've come here, you might as well stay. Everybody's got limits. So I stayed, and then it came to the time for the auction, and it got up within 2 bids. It was already at the early estimate. And in a very short time, it was at double the estimate. I just kept putting my finger up. And there were 3 bidders, one in the front of me, one behind me, and myself. And I just kept my finger going. And finally, when we were getting towards 3 times the estimate, there was 2 of us, and I just give the nod. And then finally they said, going for the last time, and sold to me. And there was Jeffrey Class, who had Collector's Treasury. He was a real maven of everything, on books and letters and everything. He had been at the auction because he used to buy things there. He leaned back and he said, look, you've overpaid a bit, but if it's any consolation, you've just outbid Harry Oppenheim. So I said, but he's not here. He said, no, the lady in front is from the Brenthurst Library. But I learned that even there was that guy, I can't remember, another man, but people used to bid against him. He wanted art, and they bid him up to huge, ridiculous prices. They were not stupid, the Oppenheimers. They set limits to what there was, so people wouldn't do that, take advantage of them. So I got it at 3 times the estimate, and I was over the moon with it. At the time, it was 2,800 Rand. And when I got back to the office, people said, we paid 2,800 Rand for that piece of paper. You've got to be out of your mind. But the good thing when you buy things on auction, especially when it's at major auction places, is that the prices automatically move up. It's the same in art. If Van Gogh goes for 28 million, the next Van Gogh will go above that and will keep climbing. It doesn't go downhill. So I researched this letter in all aspects of it. There it is, the diamond office, not far distant, C.J. Rhodes. I couldn't show you. In the book, you'll see that there was it's a beautiful, the paper was good from the Kimberley Club. You could see a watermark in the paper, which tied up with the date of the letter, which was, I think it was 1886, the watermark in the letter. It's very important. You hold up the letter to the light, you can see the watermark there. So that was the Rhodes letter. Now, that was I think that is the most important letter of mine. It's valuable. It's safely locked up in a security box, and I wanted to try and sell it privately to one of the Rothschilds, because the Rothschilds with a guy that enabled him to get monopoly of the diamonds. When he was in competition with Barney Bernardo, and they had to buy out the French company initially to get the first bit of control of the mines, he asked Alfred Beit, who was his partner, one of his partners, to get a connection. He had a connection to Rothschild. As somebody said, the path from one Jew to another Jew is through the path to another Jew is through one Jew. And Beit knew Rothschilds, and that's how he got his introduction to Rothschilds. He went straight overseas to Rothschilds. Rothschild said he would back him with it, came back, told Barney Bernardo that don't try and outbid me with the French company, because whatever you offer, I'll offer more. I've got Rothschild behind me, which Barney realized. Barney still had other kind of controls, which I finally had to get another way to go about it, but that's another story, which I've got no time to deal with now.
So
right.
Just before you move on, what would that sell for today?
That I don't know. When I was a diamond dealer, I had the smallest little office. I did a course at the Gemological Institute of America, and I had the smallest little office at the Diamond Club. I was still an insurance broker on the other side of Joburg. I found that you have to sell insurance, but you don't sell diamonds. People have got to buy diamonds. You can't sell a diamond. Show people diamonds, they either want them or they don't want them. Insurance is a different thing altogether. And when I was at the Diamond Club, there was a dealer there who knew I had this Rhodes letter, and he said, "How much do you think it's worth?" And the years had gone by already. And I said, "Look, with inflation, the value of the dollar, it's everything, it's probably worth $10,000, so more or less." One day, about a year later, he arrives in my office with these diamond dealers have always got lots of notes. He comes in with $10,000 in notes, and he says, "Oh, I want to get that Rhodes letter." And I said, "You're crazy. I'm not selling the Rhodes letter. I didn't say it was for sale. I just said, that's what it was worth." He was quite upset, but I've kept my Rhodes letter, and I don't know what he would get. I saw recently, I know one of the directors of Sphinx in London. He's an ex-South African, Ian Shapiro, and he sent me a Rhodes letter that sold for £7,000. But it wasn't a very important letter. It was a bit later. It was during the war. I haven't really studied that letter to see why it was got that value. It was far above the estimate that they had. But that was Rhodes. So from Rhodes, I attended a lecture at summer school many years later, and it was all about Rhodes and the diamond mines. And on the Sunday after the week of lectures, I was at a luncheon where the lecturer, a guy called Desmond Colvin, came for lunch, and I told him about my Rhodes letter. He said, "Did you know, look, Rhodes's partner, Rhodes's partner was Rudd. That was they were partners for 30 years. He was partners with him in both in De Beers, he was director of De Beers, and in Goldfields. And the other partner of Rhodes, obviously, was Alfred Beit. But Rudd was his partner for 30 years. He'd come from Scotland. And Desmond Coleman told me, "Do you know that there's a descendant of Rudd who lives in the Karoo?" So I said, "Oh, I'd like to meet him." And he said, "Well," I said, "When do I get hold of him?" He said, "Well, his address is Bevel John Rudd, Karoo N1, which is in the style of Wellington. Wellington put his address as the Duke of Wellington, London, West 1. So everybody knew where he lived. I did find out where Bevel John Rudd lived, and I went to see him. And now I want to just tell you about that, because that is how this book came about. That was the whole letter of Rhodes. But we won't have time to go through all that. Okay, just skip the bottom of the letter. That was Carbonacci's kraal. It was on the N1 between the Durans and the other little place in the Tilly just now in the Cape. I did find it. We were going to return back from Cape to Johannesburg. Barbara and I stopped over there. He put us up in the main house. It had a few rondavels, and we were there. I showed him my letter, a copy of my letter of Rhodes, and we discussed things, and he showed me a famous letter of his that Rhodes had sent to Rudd, his great-grandfather, and we talked about it, and then he said, right, well, I'll see you guys. He took us for drinks up on, those are the Hex River Mountains, to quite a nice vantage point there, vantage point on the mountains where we had sundowners, brought us back, and then he said, well, I'll see you at dinner time. And then when we were waiting for him in the lounge of the hotel, I looked at the table there on an ashtray with 3 Olympic Games medals. Now, before I go any further, that's one of my big collecting things is the Olympic Games. I've been to 4 Olympic Games, and I've met Jesse Owens, I've met Emil Zatopek, I've had incredible experiences at the Olympics. And when I saw those medals there, I was very excited. As I was looking at the medals, Bevel, his full name is Bevel John Rudd, but his father was also Bevel John Rudd, but we called him, he went as John. And John said, yes, those are my father's medals. He got a gold, a silver, and bronze at the Antwerp Olympics. He's the only South African who's ever got it in track and field, a gold, a silver, and a bronze. And it was in the 400 meters, the 800 meters, and the 4x400. And I was very excited about that because I had never really seen I had seen a medal before, but just to see this, and I collected, my collection went down to 1924, which was the Chariots of Fire year. Antwerp was 1920. So that we had dinner that night, and the next morning we're packing up to leave, and I was waiting for Barbara, and I was looking around the premises, and I went into, there's his father winning the gold medal. That one, I'll just digress for a moment. That on the right there, the one sitting on the left-hand side, that was his father, Bevel John Rudd. They call themselves the Achilles Club. You were either at Cambridge or Oxford, but you belonged to that club if you were a top athlete. If you go to the top row standing, that's the first, second, third, fourth guy is Harold Abrams from Chariots of Fire. He was only going to come into prominence 4 years later. He didn't do so well in the Antwerp Games. So that's an original photograph. I'll tell you about how I've come to have it now. And
Jeff, can you just go back one?
Yeah.
So I think it's very interesting that if you look at the date on this, it's exactly today's date, 21 years ago.
Okay. I didn't know that. Thank you. And there he says here, here's the Jacqueline Bouvier letter now. I'll now jump ahead. When I was walking around the complex, I came to a little rondavel, kind of a narrow one. The cylinder was narrow. And it was called the think tank. I walked into the think tank, and against the wall, there was a framed letter hanging on the wall. If you're a letter collector, you head straight to the letter, and there it was, a letter signed Jacqueline. And when I read that letter, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes, it was just unbelievable to me. So let me now go back to this one. So that was Bevel John, his father. You've got a guy that Bevel John Rudd. He was a tank. He fought in the first tank battle in World War I, and got the Medal of Honor, the NC, not the Victoria Cross, but the military cross. Yeah, it's not quite the same amount of bravery. It's a great honor. There's the letter that I saw hanging there, and it's just signed Jacqueline. At the top there, it was Bouvier on Bouvier paper. I immediately knew it was Jacqueline Bouvier. Now, just there's the letter. Dear Bevel, I was terribly surprised and thrilled to get your letter with its precious content. I don't see how you remembered this long. I think it is so very nice and very brave of you to send anything that valuable thousands of miles across an ocean to a creature who might very easily never send it back. I can't tell you how exciting it was to hold that letter and think that Cecil Rhodes had touched the same paper almost 100 years ago. It made me so much more real, made it so much more real. I now worship him more than ever. And then she becomes far more famous than Rhodes and Richard, because she married Onassis at the end after the Kennedys. So
this was Jacqueline Kennedy.
This was now to become later Jacqueline Kennedy. So I asked him, he'd already gone when I saw this, and I called him since I got back to Joburg. He said, John, you've got to get me a copy of that letter. I've just got to own a copy of that letter. And I started to think about it and thinking, oh, if I only had that letter, I could really make such a fantastic story out of this whole thing. Anyhow, he did send me that copy, which is a very good copy, and I've now really got the idea in my head of writing the book, and that's when I started thinking about it and got going with it. Yeah, all right, let me just go back a bit. John Rudd and I became good friends, and years later, when I was writing the book, I wanted to get hold of him to ask him a few questions. And he'd now sold Carbonati's Kraal, and he had bought a place up in Ceres, and he had a little pied-à-terre in Worcester. And I went out to see him. And we got talking again, and I told him that I'm writing the book and it's going to become words on paper. And that was the last time that I saw John. And then he died a couple of weeks later. I wasn't in town, I was in the Zoutpansberg Mountains. I didn't hear about it. And then his wife, I got a phone call one day from his ex-wife saying, I picked up that you and John were corresponding by email. I just wanted to tell you that he died. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. It was terrible. And I said, look, John's had a letter there from Jacqueline Bouvier. Don't let it go to anybody else. I'll pay over the odds whatever that letter goes for. It's more valuable to me than anybody in the world. And she said, well, look, there's a lot of other things here that you can come and see. I've got all this stuff. She was an ex-wife of his. She was living on a wine estate outside Wellington, and I arranged to come there, and then she took me up into the attic. There was all John's stuff there. And she left me to it and said, look, sort through it. Some of this has got to go to Marguerite Poland. I don't know if she's a well-known authoress. She'd written a book on John's father, about his Olympic Games and the other things he had done. And I looked through all the stuff, and she said the letter you'll have to deal with. A cousin of ours is also Rudd. He's an auctioneer in Cape Town. You'll have to negotiate with him. When I did see him, he told me what the prices was going to be. I never paid more for a letter. But he said, look, I want to give you a bonus. Inside there was this letter, which is now to John, written in 1960. Dear John, of course I remember you and do appreciate hearing from you from so far away and after such a long time. Many thanks for your nice letter. Now, let me tell you about John. John graduated at Eton. He went to school at Eton. When he finished school, he went to Sandhurst, the military college in England, and he graduated there as the top student, winning the Golden Sword. War just ended, and he went into the Guards. He became Gulfstream Guards, and he was posted to Palestine, and was now part of the British force in Palestine. And that was an interesting period because he kept a diary of his time while he was there. That's his diary that he kept, which I've got now. He gave that to his dad. That was the copy he gave to his dad. Signed Bevel John, January 1948. And his dad died a few months later, which was quite poignant for me because my dad also died in 48. And anyway, after Palestine was, during that period, he wasn't injured at the bombing of the King David. He actually saw it. He was leaving Tel Aviv that morning and saw the actual explosion. But he was injured in another bombing and got osteomyelitis and came back to South Africa, where he was operated on at the military hospital. There he met Harry Oppenheimer, and Harry Oppenheimer said, if you come back to South Africa, give us a shout, and maybe we can find a job for you, or you can maybe join the Anglo group, which eventually he did, and he became personal assistant to Ernest Oppenheimer. Then he had a most fascinating career, this man. Then comes King Kong, which is, of course, a lot of his downfall. There you can see the King Kong organizing committee. Remember King Kong?
Yeah.
Well, some of us remember it there. It was put on at Wits. It was an all-black show. Marie McKeber was the lady singer in it. And it was a great production. Much controversy, but they couldn't ban it, the government, because it was at Wits, and Wits were allowed to do that. And you'll see there that John Rudd, he was the King Kong First Night Committee, John Rudd. He was there. Eventually, John Rudd had an affair with one of the black dancers, was caught by not the secret police, but the special branch or whatever. He was arrested, there was a trial, and he got a 9-month sentence to jail and went to jail for the breaking of the Immorality Act, which set his career back somewhat. That was the two accused. That was Dottie, who he was caught in bed with, and that was John. And we then come to this letter which I had found of his, just that top part. And he was now writing to Jacqueline. Thank you for your letter at the time of the nomination of your husband, and congratulations on everything ever since. My fortunes moved in rather the opposite direction to yours. I find myself now in a Transvaal jail for having defied the spirit of one of the basic apartheid laws. In case it should interest you, I enclose a cutting about it, but it's not about my trouble that I would like to ask your help. In 1959, a few friends of mine had started the African Music and Drama Association, and he was trying to get help, and he mentions King Kong. Now, we don't know how the letter got there or whether it did get there, but we know that John received food parcels from the White House and the special hamper at Christmas time, which he shared with the prison ward. So that was an interesting side of it. He sent me cuttings of another friend of his, which was Christine Keeler. I'm sure lots of you can remember Christine Keeler. There was the whole perfumer thing. She went to jail. He felt very sorry for anybody who went to jail for sex, having been experienced himself, and he wrote to her solicitors asking him a question, and he wrote back to John saying, "Thank you for your letter of 19th, since I can assure you that flowers can be sent to prisoners at Holloway, but nothing else. If you care to send some flowers to Miss Keeler, I'm sure that would be very much appreciated. Yours sincerely." And that was a fantastic letter. I wanted to have a film made of John Rudd's life. I spoke to 2 people who make films, but they said you don't realize the cost of having this. It's a whole frame period, because if you have the Palestine War, if you have the Immorality Act, if you have somebody his father winning the gold at the Olympic Games, you could make an incredible story, but it's spread over too many years, so it would cost a fortune. So let somebody else one day make it. Right, that's it. What else have we got there that you were going to ask?
So I wanted to ask you,
me.
what is your most prized collectible?
Okay, the most prized collectible.
Jay?
Yes, sir.
Just one question. There's a Rudd Road in Ilovo.
Yeah.
Is it named after?
Yeah, so that's of the original road.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the partner. Now I just want to get to this. I don't want to get
Number 6.
to, there's a Rhodes letter now.
Or
The most
number 8.
prized collection.
Your most prized collection.
There's
Number 8, maybe.
David by Duff Cooper. Okay. Right, that's my most prized collection of anything. I love it. Right, so let me just tell you about this. I don't normally collect books. I did the same things every time I went to London, visited the same dealers, took a long turn in where the American Embassy is, that part of London. And I ended up in a road I hadn't been before, and I looked and it was a bookshop called Hayward Hill. So I thought, I'll pop in and then skip bookshops. Went in and said to the guy, "Have you got anything on letters and documents I collect?" He said, "Sorry, sir, we don't deal in that sort of thing. But you can look around." He said, "I'll tell you what, I think there might be something of interest." He said, "I've got something I'll show you." Okay. Now, let me just take you back. If you've got an original manuscript of a book like any famous book that you can think of, those are in the institutions of universities in America, because they cost a fortune. The average person cannot get them. Okay, so what I've got here is an original manuscript of a book called David. It's written by Duff Cooper. At the time when he showed me this book, after he brought the book, I didn't know, I knew the book because I'd actually read the book. I'd read the book twice, but I didn't know who Duff Cooper was. And now let me just show you some of the things. The guy then brought, that's how the book was, David by Duff Cooper, when it was printed. And he had the original writing of the book bound like that in beautiful red calf leather, and gave it to his mistress, not his mistress, well, he had lots of girlfriends, mistress, Louise de Vilmorin. He was a good friend of his wife's and remained a good friend of his wife's even after he died. There is the book. You can read every word of it yourself. That's how he wrote it, one shot. He just sat down. He had an incredible memory, this guy, and he would write it. Duff Cooper was the cabinet minister at the time when Chamberlain returned from Munich saying, "Peace in our time, peace with honor." He resigned his seat as a cabinet minister as an anti-appeasement move. You can read every word of it. In fact, my editor said I must put in whatever quote I like from that book, which I've read many times. And it says there's, I printed the quote, history has no other instance of a man who has fought the wars, made the laws, and written the songs of his people. But what found, I didn't know at the time, now that part over there where you've got the red cross, that's what he scratched out, and that never appeared in the book. So that's all the original book. When I was at school, if you wrote a composition, you wrote it in rough, then you made a fairly good copy, and you rechecked it, and then you finally handed it into the teacher, all neatly written. He just sat down and he wrote it in 1943. You'll find the interesting thing. This book is dedicated to the Jewish people who gave the world the Old Testament and the New Testament and many things in the realm of beauty for which they've been ill repaid. That's in the preface of the book. And I don't know if I've got a, there's actually in the book that he put in with a staple. That's his own handwriting of Duff Cooper's. So everything is in there. Now, that at the end of the war, he became the ambassador of England in Paris. When they got back Paris after the end of the war, he was there at this beautiful house where they were, which had been where Napoleon's sister had stayed. And he said, look, if you guys build me a library that I can put my books in, when I leave, I'll leave my books behind, which he did do. And he said he didn't mind if people, when you mark a page by folding the leaf on the top, he didn't mind as long as people read the books. He wanted people to interact with the books, which he left there. Now, I'm showing you this because when I saw this book in that bookshop, I was going the next day to the Olympic Games in Atlanta, and I couldn't slip this big heavy book with me. And I said to the guy, look, I've got to get back to South Africa. When I get back in 2 weeks' time, I will get an official invoice from you and I'll send you the money, which he wanted £2,000 for. And a couple of days later, apparently, the then ambassador, this is now 1996, which is 50 years after 1946, when Duff Cooper's library was set up. It was the 50th anniversary, and they said that he wanted, the ambassador now in Paris wanted something that he could donate to this library. The chap in the at the bookshop said, look, I had a fantastic thing for you. I promised it to the South African, and he honored it and he kept it for me. And I've luckily still got it today, which is the most fantastic thing. The reason why I read it twice, I read it many years ago. There's a book called God Knows. It's about David and Solomon. And it's the guy wrote, well, what did he say now? What did he write? No, it doesn't matter. But it's you've got to know your history of David and Solomon to appreciate the incredible humor in it. And that's why I did it twice. Okay. Now I'm just going to show you. How's the time there, guys?
Well, what time you meet?
I don't know. It wasn't.
25 to 1.
Then we'll just finish off with the birthday book. I'd like to show you if you don't. That's the oldest thing I've got, which is a 1394 document. There it is. That's an indenture.
Can you explain why it's called an
Yeah, it's
indenture?
important indenture because the indentation's on the top. That's how they cut it. So would be made in two parts. They just cut it at random. Your copy had to fit my copy. They didn't have copy machines in 1394. So that's how indenture came about. There's one of Henry VIII. Can you see the indenture at the top? this was now written in English. The first one was in Latin. You can see there, King Henry VIII. That's the top line, extreme right. Then you've
Hey,
got,
Jeff, can I ask you just, I've got two key questions that I really want to
yeah,
know.
ask me.
The first one is, what is your greatest mitzvah? What was your biggest
Okay,
prize?
I'll come to the material quickly. Let me just show you this one. There's an indenture. This one was in 1789, which is the beginning of the French Revolution. When I was at school, 1789 was written in big on the blackboard. I've never forgotten that date. That's the date the French Revolution started. So I put it aside. I'd just seen one of these, of the thousands I've got. And it was the 25th of March, which is my daughter's birthday, so I put it aside. Some weeks later, I found another one, 25th of March, 1789. It's exactly duplicate of this one, that's how indentures work. That one matched that one. But there were two people to the agreement. There's one person's seal, there's another person's seal, and there they were repeated. So when there any dispute, you brought your copy, and I had my copy, and they had to match. An interesting thing about it, for years I didn't realize that it certainly wasn't cut in that line. It took me a long time to find out how they managed to cut that thing. But that's another story of another day, which you'll have to come and see. Okay, now let me get to the Metzia. Here's the Metzia. I go into a bookshop, I'm trying to find a present for somebody who's got the same birthday as me. I see a birthday book, I buy it, it's 12 Rand. Oh, it's 12 Rand. I take it home, I show Barbara, I'm going to give this to our friend Greta for her birthday, but we get a proper present, but just something like this. And as I page through it, this is what I see. That it's got signatures in it. Now, you can't forget Lee Botha's signature there. Now, birthday book is where your friend gave you the book and you wrote your name in it on the day you were born, on your birthday. Okay? So Lee Botha signed it there. And I then spotted Smuts, which I knew because I had one. Then I spotted, looked like Cullinan. I just checked up from what day Cullinan was born. He was born on the February the 12th. So I knew it was him. Then I looked further and I found Percy Fitzpatrick, the guy who wrote Jock in the Bushveld, and that other more famous things about him. There's A. Bailey on the right-hand side, A. Bailey. This was C.F. Bayers, who's also one of the generals. And then the prize of law is Chris de la Rey. De la Rey is highly sought after by the Afrikaans community in this country. Of the collectors, and that to me was an absolute Metzia. I got the name from the diamond industry where it was called a Metzia. If De Beers gave you people who used to be, I would never have got one. People who got big parcels of diamonds from De Beers, they sometimes put in a Metzia, which is a nice biggish diamond that you could make some good money on. David told me Metzia means in Hebrew a find, yeah. So that took me now all the years to find out why did they sign this book? But why did they sign all these guys? And eventually I found old who's and saw that a lot of them had after their names TLA. And then I found out TLA stands for Transvaal Legislative Assembly. After the Boer War, Transvaal was an independent, almost an independent country. And years later, I found the debates of the Legislative Assembly. There were all the members, they were all in the book. And that was the Hansard recordings, and I took those books as well. And so that was really a Metzia. I got that for 12 Rand. You don't often find something that comes your way like that.
And then Jeff,
I just want to show you one thing which I like, because I nearly wrote it. I was going to write a book on on Alfred, the Forgotten Giant. I've got that's a full-size portrait picture of him, which hung in my house for years. I've still got it. It doesn't fit in here. He signed one of the that you can see that I've got a big collection of old share certificates, very, very big. I collected it before it was a hobby, and then it became a serious hobby worldwide called Scripophilia, the lovers of script. There's a script now, script's gone out of fashion, don't have script anymore, but there's still valuable things there. Bite signed is the second signature there. I was going to write a little book called The Forgotten Giant. I had a tongue-in-cheek thing about Bite. It was from Portuguese Jews that lived in Germany. And they changed to become Lutherans because of the anti-Semitism. And my own theory of why Bite was a very modest man, but nobody ever knows about old Bite. But I know about him. The reason was, I say, is the Germans didn't like him because he was a Jew. The Jews didn't like him because he'd given up the faith. He then got to England, and the British didn't like him because he was German. And when he got to South Africa, the Boers didn't like him because he was British. So poor old Bite, nobody liked him, but he was a very popular guy. One person even commented there was something Christ-like about him. He helped everybody. He never had an enemy in this world. And he was the executor of Rhodes Estate. Incredible guy, died shortly afterwards. And yeah, I just want, can you give me 3 minutes? I want to show you something interesting.
And then also, if you can just say, is there anything that you regret either buying or regret not buying?
Yeah, what I've got in the book, you'll see there's a chapter called Letters That Came and Went. I never owned them. I can't believe that I was so stupid not to buy them. Jeffrey Class offered me the suitcase of letters that had belonged to Schreiner, Justice Schreiner. And I didn't have time enough to sort it. I sorted quite a lot of them. And it was time to go home on a Saturday. And I said, let me take these home. I'll read them on the weekend. I need Jeffrey well. And I took them and I photocopied them, thank goodness. And all he wanted was 1,000 rand. I don't know why at the time I decided not to take them. And they were sold. I don't know where they got to, because they didn't get to the Brenthurst Library. So I don't know where they are. Unless they're there and nobody's looked at them. But there is incredible stuff in there. It's in the book. I put them in there. One important point is I took opinion from the top, what do you call it? But to know, who does a letter belong to? The letter doesn't belong to you if you bought the letter. It belongs to the writer. There are different laws and regulations that change from time to time in different parts of the world. For the Jacqueline one, I wrote to Caroline, the daughter, because Jacqueline was dead by now, and asked her for permission to reproduce this letter, and they refused. So I decided to put it anyway, because if I ever got sued, it would be a big selling point for my book. So I weren't going to sue me. And afterwards, ironically, about 6 months after that, they revealed all kinds of other horrible things about Jacqueline. I thought that I had a Barney Bernardo signature, but that signature over there was Henry Bernardo, not Solly. I mean, not Barney. That was how I tried to do interconnectedness of different people. Now, Duff Cooper was quite an incredible bloke. I've actually got, I've met the whole family, that all those Coopers. I researched that book. I've met all the family, his son, grandson, and his great-granddaughter. That's the Duff Cooper Diaries. It's incredible. All the people he met, he didn't mind what he said. And This is what he said about, so I was connecting people. How was Duff Cooper going to be connected to the Queen Mother, Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret? I'll just tell you what old Duff was the biggest womanizer of the century. It says here on 8 August 1947, Alexander Corder came to see me at my request at 12. I offered him the cinema rights of David for £1 million francs, which I calculated last night is $135,000 in today's money with inflation and all the rest, which was not such a lot of money, which agreed to pay for them. Sire Berlin came to see me at 3 and showed me what he had so far written of the Marshall Conference report. I thought it very good. I dined with Corder, Rita Hayworth, and Cary Grant at Verdun. Rita Hayworth is very pretty, but I don't like dyed yellow hair with a dark skin. And she has pretty hands with nails were too long and dirty. Argued that Fornstar could take so little trouble. I like Cary Grant. That's what he said about him. But no, he wasn't. But I want to show you what he said about Elizabeth. No, just that he was commenting on Princess Margaret, saying that she's got lovely skin, lovely face, she's a very attractive girl, and she's going to get herself into a lot of trouble when she gets old, and was very prescient because she ruined her life, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But he thought that Elizabeth, as a princess, was fantastic. Guys, thanks very much for being with me.
Before we finish, I just want to say it's interesting that Jeff spoke about the book of the Tower of London that started it all, and he paid £12 for it. Then he spoke about the birthday book.
She was also 12.
That was 12 Rand.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to finish now because it's still 12. So it's before 1 o'clock. And Jeff, thank you so much for.
Thank you, David.
It's amazing how passion comes through and how you start with something and then it just grows and your knowledge around it grows as well. But often we keep it to ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's incredible that Jeff has managed to put it together and in such an unbelievable collection. And Jeff said he's going to put some of these books in the library here. Take your time and go through it. I find it unbelievable that there's so much value in a book like this. And I feel not only is the book a treasure, but I feel a treasure actually knowing Jeff and speaking to Jeff and interacting with Jeff. And thank you so much for the
Thank you,
talk, but
David.
thank you for being who you are.